I was standing at the kitchen counter when I heard the mail slot click. I don't know why I stopped what I was doing. I had a pot of soup on the stove, half a grocery list on the notepad by the phone, and 3 things I'd been meaning to do since Tuesday. But something made me set down the wooden spoon and walk to the front door. The envelope was cream-colored, thick, the kind of paper that costs something. I picked it up and saw my son's name in the return address, his new address, the one I'd had to text him twice to get. And then I looked at the front, at how it was addressed, and I just stood there in the hallway in my socks. Mrs. Dorothy Keene. Not Mom, not Dorothy and family. Just Mrs. Dorothy Keene, like I was a neighbor. They felt obligated to include. I set it on the counter next to the soup. I didn't open it for a full 20 minutes. I just let it sit there while I stirred and added salt and tried to tell myself it didn't mean anything. People address things formally all the time. It's etiquette. It's just how some families do it. But I knew whose handwriting that was. And I knew it wasn't my son's. My son, I should tell you, is 34 years old. His name is Owen. Wait, no. His name is I keep almost saying the wrong one. Old habit. He goes by his middle name now. His wife prefers it. His name is Thomas, and he has been Thomas to everyone who knows him these last 3 years, ever since he started dating the woman who would become my daughter-in-law. Her name is Stacy. She is 31, very organized, and has opinions about everything from how a dishwasher should be loaded to how a thank you note should be worded. She is not a bad person. I want to be clear about that, but she is a person who likes things a particular way, and my son, who I raised to be gentle and accommodating, has discovered that it is much easier to agree with her than to disagree. I noticed this slowly, the way you notice a tide going out. First, it was small things. He stopped calling on Sunday afternoons the way he used to. Then he started saying "we" when I'd ask what he thought about something. We don't really do that. We've been thinking. We decided. And then one day I realized I hadn't seen him alone, just the two of us, in almost a year. That was 8 months before the envelope arrived. The wedding was scheduled for late October, up in Vermont. Stacy's family had a property there, a renovated farmhouse that her parents used as a vacation home. I'd seen pictures of it online. Stone fireplace, wraparound porch, maple trees that would be just turning color that time of year. It was beautiful. I'll give her that. I opened the envelope finally, after the soup had been ladled and eaten and the bowl washed and dried. I read the card twice. The ceremony was on a Saturday. Dinner reception to follow. RSVP by the 15th. There was no note inside. No extra slip of paper saying "We're so glad you'll be there, Mom," or "Please let us know if you need anything." Just the printed card and a small envelope for my response. I turned it over in my hands, looked at my name on the front again. Mrs. Dorothy Keene. I thought about calling my son right then. I rehearsed it in my head. "Hey, sweetheart, I got the invitation, just had a quick question about the accommodations." Something light, something that didn't sound like what it actually was, which was a woman sitting alone at her kitchen table feeling like she was disappearing. I didn't call. I wrote "accepts with pleasure" on the little card and mailed it the next morning. My husband passed 11 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. Thomas was 23. He held my hand at the funeral and told me we'd figure it out together. And for a while, we did. He would drive down from Columbus every couple of months. We'd make his father's chili recipe and watch old movies and talk about nothing important. And it felt, on those weekends, like we were still a family. I'm not saying Stacy ruined that. I'm saying it changed. I sold the house in Columbus 2 years after Richard died. It was too much space and too many stairs, and the furnace needed replacing. I found a smaller place in Dayton, a nice little 2-bedroom on a quiet street, close to my sister and close to the community center where I volunteer on Thursdays. I made a life. A good one. I want you to understand that before I continue, because this story isn't about a woman who had nothing. I had plenty. I just didn't have my son the way I used to. The drive to Vermont took me just over 12 hours. I'd offered to fly, but the flights were unreasonably priced, and I've always preferred driving when I have time. I stopped once in Albany for coffee and gas and arrived at the farmhouse around 5 in the afternoon on the Friday before the wedding. There were already cars in the long gravel driveway, rental cars and out-of-state plates. I could hear music from inside, something with a lot of bass. Someone had strung lights along the porch railing, and they were already glowing amber in the early evening light. I knocked. No one heard. I tried the handle, and it opened. The inside of the house was full of people I didn't know. Stacy's people, mostly cousins and college friends, and a few women who looked like they might be bridesmaids. There were half-empty wine glasses on every flat surface and a speaker going in the corner, and the particular loud energy of a gathering that had already been going for a few hours. Stacy appeared from the kitchen. She looked surprised to see me. Not unpleasantly, just startled. The way you look when you've forgotten a detail. "Dorothy," she said, and air kissed my cheek. "You made it. The drive wasn't too bad." "It was fine," I said. 12 hours. Good roads. Great." She was already looking past me. "Thomas is around somewhere. Let me find him." She moved away before I could say anything else. I stood near the doorway with my overnight bag and watched people I'd never met refill their glasses. Thomas found me about 10 minutes later. He hugged me, a real hug, the kind that lasted longer than a second, and he looked tired and happy in the complicated way people look the day before their wedding. I didn't bring up the invitation. This wasn't the moment. I just asked about the ceremony and whether the weather was going to hold, and he said he hoped so, and then someone called his name from across the room and he gave me an apologetic look. "Stacy's mom will show you where you're staying," he said. "She handles all that." Her mother, a perfectly pleasant woman named Gail, materialized at my elbow and walked me upstairs. Past the master bedroom, past a room that seemed to be the bridal suite based on the dresses hanging on the door. Down a narrower hallway at the back of the house. "We put you in here," Gail said, opening a door. It was a small room. A twin bed. A window that looked out at the back of the barn. Clean, fine, no complaints on the surface of it, but I had passed 4 other rooms on the way here, rooms with queen beds and ensuite bathrooms, rooms assigned to Stacey's aunt, her college roommate, her maid of honor. I am the mother of the groom. I set my bag on the twin bed and smiled at Gail and said, "Thank you so much." The rehearsal dinner was at a restaurant 20 minutes away, a converted mill with exposed beams and a pro-asphyxie menu. I drove myself because there was no room in the cars going from the farmhouse. I sat at the far end of the long table, between a groomsman I'd never met and the great-uncle of Stacy's who was hard of hearing. The toasts were given at the other end. I couldn't see Thomas's face when he spoke. My son said something that made everyone laugh. I saw the ripple of it travel down the table, heads tilting back, hands covering smiles. I laughed too, on the outside, even though I hadn't heard a word. I drove home alone. I lay in the twin bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about the chili recipe and the Sunday phone calls and whether I had done something, some specific thing, that I could point to and say, "There, that's where it went." I couldn't find it. I looked for a long time and I couldn't find it. The wedding ceremony was on the lawn behind the farmhouse. The maple trees were everything the pictures had promised. Deep orange and red against a pale sky. Stacy was beautiful. I mean that sincerely. She came down a stone path in a dress that was simple and perfect, and I understood, watching her, why my son loved her. I sat in the 3rd row. Not the first. The first 2 rows were Stacy's family. Thomas's side. Just me, really. And 2 cousins who had driven in from Michigan was arranged in the row behind. During the vows, Thomas cried. I hadn't seen my son cry since his father's funeral. I pressed my lips together and looked at my hands folded in my lap and breathed through my nose until the feeling passed. Afterward, at the reception, a woman I didn't know came and sat beside me at my assigned table. She was warm and chatty and asked how I knew the couple. When I told her I was the groom's mother, something shifted in her expression. Just briefly, just a flicker. And I knew she was putting together the same thing I'd been putting together for 2 days. "Oh," she said, "how wonderful." Then she turned slightly toward the person on her other side. I had not planned to say anything. I want to be honest about that. I had planned to get through the weekend with my dignity intact, drive home Sunday, and have the conversation with my son sometime later when the honeymoon was over and life had settled. That was the plan. But then the toasts began. Stacy's father spoke first, and he was lovely, funny, and warm, and clearly adored his daughter. Her maid of honor went next, a long speech full of inside jokes I didn't understand but laughed at anyway. Then an uncle. Then a college friend. And then the best man looked at the room and said, and of course Thomas wouldn't be the man he is today without the incredible people who raised him. And he looked at Stacy's parents, and he raised his glass to them. Stacy's parents. I watched my son. He was smiling, nodding, nodding. He didn't look over at me. Something happened in my chest then. Not anger, exactly. Anger would have been easier. It was more like a door closing. Quiet. Final. I stood up. I don't fully know, even now, what made me do it. I stood, and the room went uncertain. People turning, glasses half raised, the best man trailing off. I picked up my water glass because it was what was in front of me, and I looked at my son, and I spoke to him directly and only to him. Thomas, I said, I have sat quietly this whole weekend because I did not want to make things harder for you. But I need to say one thing, and I'll say it once. I paused. My voice was steadier than I expected. You had a father who loved you until the very last day he had breath. And you had a mother who raised you alone after he was gone, and somewhere along the way, both of us seemed to have become invisible. I don't know how that happened, but I want you to know that I see it, and I hope someday you will too. I set the glass down. I sat back down. The room was very quiet for about 4 seconds. Then someone started a new conversation. The way people do when they need to fill silence fast. And the moment passed and the reception moved on. Thomas did not look at me for the rest of the evening. I left early the next morning. Before anyone was awake, before coffee, before the post-wedding brunch that had been mentioned but never confirmed. I wrote a short note. Congratulations to you both. Safe travels. Left it on the kitchen counter and drove out the gravel driveway as the sky was just going gray. I stopped at a diner outside Burlington. I ordered eggs and coffee and sat by the window and watched the sun come up over the hills. A couple at the next table was having a quiet argument about directions. An old man in a John Deere cap was reading the paper. The waitress had a daisy tattooed on her wrist and called everyone hon. I sat there for almost an hour, not because I had to, just because I wasn't ready to be alone in a car yet. He called 6 weeks later. I had not reached out first. That was its own decision, one I made deliberately, not out of stubbornness, but out of self-preservation. I had spent 11 years making every call, covering every distance, being the one who tried. I needed to know if he would. He did. It was a Tuesday evening. I was reading. The phone rang, and I looked at the screen, and it was Thomas, and I took one breath before I answered. Mom, he said. Hi, sweetheart. A long pause. I let it sit. I've been thinking about what you said at the reception, he said. All right. Stacy was upset. I need you to know that. I understand. Another pause. But he stopped. Started again. I think I've been letting things slide that I should have caught. I didn't see it while it was happening. I thought I was just... He let out a breath. I thought I was just keeping the peace. Keeping the peace and keeping silent aren't always the same thing, I said. He was quiet for a moment. No, I'm starting to see that. We talked for almost 2 hours that night. It wasn't a resolution. I want to be careful not to make it sound like a television ending, because real life doesn't work that way. We didn't cry and forgive each other and schedule a family vacation. He said some things that stung a little. I said some things I had to sit with afterward to make sure they were fair, but we talked. Actually talked, the way we used to, the way I hadn't been sure we still could. Before we hung up, he said, I don't want you to feel like a stranger, Mom. I don't want to feel like one either, I said. It's been 4 months since that phone call. Thomas and I talk every couple of weeks now. Sometimes Stacy is in the background. Sometimes she isn't. We are not a close family yet. We are working toward one carefully, the way you work toward something you know might break if you push too hard. I rearranged my guest room last month, put in a new lamp, fresh towels in the bathroom, a little folding table by the window where someone could set a coffee cup in the morning, just in case. Just to be ready. There's a photograph on my refrigerator from my son's wedding day. I'm in it, off to one side, looking at the maple trees. I don't look unhappy exactly. I look like a woman who is paying attention. I think that's who I've always been. I just stopped expecting everyone to notice. I still think about that twin bed sometimes. The one at the back of the farmhouse, down the narrow hallway, past all the rooms with the queen beds and the ensuite bathrooms. I lay there the night before my son's wedding and stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out how a person gets moved to the edges of her own family without ever being told that's what was happening. I don't think Stacy woke up one day and decided to erase me. I don't think Thomas made a conscious choice to let her. That's almost the harder part. There was no single villainous moment I could point to and say, there, that's where it broke. It happened gradually, through 100 small accommodations, 100 moments where he chose the path of least resistance and told himself it wasn't costing anyone anything. But it was costing me. And eventually, the cost showed. I've thought a lot about what made me stand up at that reception. I wasn't angry, or not only angry, it was something quieter than anger. It was the recognition that if I sat down and said nothing, I would be agreeing to my own invisibility. And I had spent enough of my life being seen by the one person who mattered to me, my husband Richard, that I knew what it felt like to be truly known. I wasn't willing to accept the alternative without at least naming it out loud. That took something. I won't pretend it didn't. Standing up in a room full of strangers and speaking a truth that no one wanted spoken. That's not something you do on instinct. You do it because you've quietly built enough of a foundation in yourself that you trust the ground beneath your own feet. Richard used to say I was the steadiest person he knew. I'm not sure I believed him when he was alive. I believe him now. What I've come to understand, sitting with all of it these last several months, is that the choices we make in the hard moments are almost always the result of who we've been in the quiet ones. Thomas calling me 6 weeks after the wedding didn't happen because I embarrassed him into it. It happened because somewhere underneath the accommodation and the peacekeeping, he is still the boy I raised. A person with enough honesty in him to eventually look at his own behavior and reckon with it. That's not nothing. That took something from him too. And Stacy. I'm still learning how to think about Stacy. I don't hate her. What I've decided is that people who diminish others are usually people who haven't done the harder work of figuring out who they are without the diminishing. That's her work to do, not mine. My work is simpler. Keep the guest room ready. Answer when he calls. Don't shrink myself to make anyone else more comfortable, but don't harden myself either. Stay open, stay upright. There's a photograph on my refrigerator from the wedding. I'm off to one side, looking at the maple trees. I look like a woman paying attention. That's what I am. That's what I've always been. I just decided to stop pretending it was enough to pay attention quietly.